thank you very much for coming. I was going to originally to talk about my two books, which are really about the interrelationship between economics and politics, but I'm going to make it much more topical. And I think a useful starting point is a comment that was made a couple of days ago by a man called Jamie Dimon, who is head of one of the world's leading investment banks. He said, an economic hurricane is heading our way. Well, you may think, following the level of debate in the UK, that the hurricane's already here, but the argument is that there's something much bigger coming in our direction. And I just want to talk about that, whether it's plausible, what it amounts to. And I think the best way to, at least the way I understand it, is in terms of a series of layers of problems. Because at the bottom, we've got what we're already living through, which is the so-called cost of living crisis. And then superimposed on that, we've had the first impacts of the war, the Ukraine war. And then superimposed on that, and just beginning to be apparent, is the second stage of the war as we get energy sanctions, because we haven't really got energy sanctions yet, combined with the impact on food, the big thing, which is only just beginning to become apparent. And I think on top of that, there are some other layers, bigger things that are happening. One is the so-called Great Schism, which is opening up between China and its allies, which include Russia, and the Western world, and the impact of that in turn on economic connection, a phenomenon of so-called deglobalization, which people argue is happening. The evidence is a bit mixed, but the world economies are unpicking. And then on top of everything, there are these big global existential things we're all worried about, like climate change, which are kind of radically affected really by the war and the things around it. But let me start with the cost of living crisis, the inflation shock that we're living through. I mean, the way I see it happening is that there's been a big pumped up increase in demand as we recover from the COVID pandemic. And it's been helped by the fact that a lot of money was pumped into the economy, cheap interest rates really negative after inflation. Biden's stimulus package, lots of money being poured in on top of all the quantitative easing we'd had ever since the financial crisis. So you've got a recovery fueled by this stuff, and then at the same time, all kind of blockages preventing stuff being produced, and the combination of the two things is producing inflation. One kind of image that I have, which helps me to understand it, it's a bit like, those of you who've ever been in a motorway queue, on the M25 particularly, you get a collision, you get an obstacle, everything grinds to a halt, people pile in at the end of the queue, and then 2 or 3 hours later, the trouble has been cleared away. But we don't all just smoothly then glide away. It takes hours and hours to clear it because you're stopping and starting and some idiots are trying to jump from one lane to the other to get a few seconds. And that's a little bit what's happening with the world economy at the moment. And there are some very specific things that are making this a lot worse. One of them is what's been happening in natural gas. Because last year, we didn't really notice it at the time, but the Russian supply of natural gas through the pipelines was cut by about 15%. Also, the storage in Europe was cut by about 25% below what it normally is. Most of it's actually owned by Gazprom, so you don't really need to be a conspiracy theorist to work out what's happening. So natural gas prices shot up. Europeans started shopping in the Middle East, but then they were competing with China and Japan, so that pushed up the price of liquid natural gas. And so we had this upsurge of gas prices, which forms the basis of the wholesale prices for electricity, and of course gas in the UK, which is what we've all experienced and are going to see more of in the autumn. So part of it was gas. Then you've got the issues around the oil market, we thought that all the problems that used to exist with OPEC and oil shocks had all gone away because of all these American shale oil producers and so on. But actually what happened was that in the last collapse of the oil market, the shale oil companies basically closed down. And when there's a sudden upsurge of demand, there's nothing to produce. In addition, the Americans have sanctioned Venezuela and Iran, which is actually there's another blockage. And in addition, something that's been quietly going on, which is that a new kind of OPEC has been created with an alliance between Saudi Arabia and Russia. We always used to think of Saudi as being sort of best friends of the Western world, but that has changed quite radically, partly because of Prince Mohammed personally. But China is now their main customer. America doesn't really figure in terms of what they produce and consume. And so they've teamed up with the Russians to try to manage the world's supply of oil. So the combination of these restrictions and a rapid upsurge of demand has also caused oil prices to go shooting up, which is what you see at petrol pump, and is already causing rage in the United States, which is why Biden's people will probably get cutted in the autumn. So we've got the oil shock. In addition to that, a whole lot of other things are being blocked from getting out of China because of the pandemic closed down. President Xi has made a terrible mess, actually, of the COVID. It was thought initially he was doing brilliantly, but the zero COVID has meant that they are having to insulate cities, people can't get to work, production isn't getting out, all the supply chains have been disrupted. And then there are some very specific blockages in semiconductors, other things. And all of this is adding to this sort of inflationary push in the world economy. It's not just the UK. I mean, one way I think of it is it's a bit as if the whole world has just seen a big increase in indirect tax, it's a value-added tax increase on the world. And what's it done? It's pushed up prices everywhere, and it's also sucked out quite a lot of spending. People worse off, and so they spend less. So we've got the combination of inflation and stagflation, or stagnation, and the real possibility now of recession coming in, probably quite serious recession towards the end of the year, beginning of next year. These two things happening at the same time. Added to which, Western governments are getting seriously alarmed about inflation. They remember what happened back in the late 70s, so they're jacking up interest rates quite rapidly, and that in turn is producing the pressures leading to recession and deflation. So that's the first layer, combination of inflation and the potential recessionary shock coming down the track. Then we had the war. So far, the war has had only fairly indirect and modest effects on us, but it's going to grow. Basically what's happened so far is that because people in the markets have tended to worry that there are oil sanctions and gas sanctions coming, they've been busily building up stocks, and that's pushed up the price. In addition to that, what has been highly effective from the point of view of the Western economies is that the Europeans and Americans have hit the Russians with financial sanctions, which have really worked, and in quite a brutal way. Effectively what's happened is that Russian property, including their foreign exchange reserve, has simply been expropriated. There's some worry about, in the long run, about what this does about the rights of ownership in a capitalist system. But anyway, it's worked. The Russian foreign exchange reserves were seized. Individual private property has been seized. It's very difficult to Russians and Russian businesses to make transactions. People trying to export from Russia can't export because they can't do the currency transactions. The so-called SWIFT clearance system has been blocked for the Russians. So there are very severe financial sanctions which are beginning to really get through to them. But that's only the first stage.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.